Windows for shelter.
It was,
They're not exactly withering questioners.
yeah,
Are you going over
but
to
they were
the
good
jail when you're
questions.
through here?
They were
Just
good
for a minute,
questions.
yeah. It depends on.
Highly educated people under control, we will move forward here.
Happy to see you someday on the weekend, you know, so.
I'd like to call the meeting to order of the Jail Ad Hoc Committee. I'd like to thank everyone for hanging in there with us. We had a little struggle time trying to get to this contract with CMH, and there was no reason for us to meet without the contract. It just didn't make any sense. When this committee was originally assigned, as you may remember, we talked about in the beginning, we had two responsibilities. One was to address the short-term needs for mental health issues in the jail. The contract before us tonight for discussion, I think, does that. And the second piece was to discuss an RFP for a jail consultant, at what level. And we're gonna go through one part and then we'll talk about the other part, what specifically we were trying to do with this RFP. But the first order of business would be approval of the minutes of the July 17th meeting. If we have a motion, please.
A motion to approve the minutes to the July 17th meeting.
Okay, motion by Mayor, second by Ritter. Further discussion? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. This is the first opportunity for public comment. Is there anyone wishing to make public comment at this time? Seeing none, let's move forward with talking about the review and recommendation of the approval of the final jail services contract between Northern Lakes Community Mental Health and Grand Traverse County. Todd, do you want to start, or?
So, we've had this contract go back and forth several times, and I think we're to a document that, while there are still some gray area, and I know specifically there's a section that the sheriff has concern on, it's a document I think there's enough meat in that if we feel that either side isn't living up to their end, there's an out clause. And specifically, the section that the sheriff does have some issue with is on page 3, paragraph 4. It discusses, in the event of a vacancy in either behavioral health provider position, Northern Lakes Community Mental Health will provide such services as may be necessary to continue to establish group services, discharge planning, and address any urgent and emergent needs. That sentence has changed several times. I know the sheriff would still like to see some more detail on there as to who steps in to continue those services, but I also understand Northern Lakes Community Mental Health's position on it's difficult for them to say who's going to step in to fill those positions, and it's very difficult to lock them into hours for that because we don't know how many cases will be being managed. We don't know how many groups at this point will be being run, but they are making the commitment to continue the services that these positions establish in the event of a vacancy. And again, this is the worst case scenario, that somebody in the year of the contract doesn't stay for the whole year and we have that vacancy. There have been some other sticking points that I think we've cleaned up. I've met with Mr. Forsythe several times on the contract. I believe that we're to a point where he's comfortable with the contract, and Northern Lakes is comfortable with the contract. Again, I know the biggest sticking point from the sheriff's perspective is that paragraph. He'd like to see some more detail in there. I just don't know that it's possible under how Northern Lakes Community Mental Health does business to put that detail in this contract.
I guess the comment that I would make in regard to that, you know, and this was one of the issues that I had with the contract when it first came out too, and we've talked about it on multiple different levels, is the fact that if that position becomes vacant and or someone is gone for a 2-week vacation, we understand that. That's a schedule issue. It's going to be a personnel problem. The question becomes is if that person leaves and we have an extended length of time to fill that position, and then the obvious thought is, okay, if they're not providing the service, then we shouldn't be paying for it, you know, and I think that probably makes some sense. You know, there will be a point, if that position remains open for an extended length of time, that there's a breach of the contract. We have the ability to cancel this contract in 30 days, no matter how we cut it. So I think I'm okay with that. You know, I know it would be ideal to say, okay, you know, if this person leaves, someone in supervisory staff or someone's going to fill it in 20 hours a week. We don't know what the need is going to be at that particular moment, you know, as of right now. We have a commitment in this program that says that if we have prisoners that are being involved in programs with CMH, those services will continue until that replacement person is in place, and that's the way I read the contract anyway. So I think we're okay with that. You know, obviously, if there was a vacancy and that vacancy went for 30, 60, 90 days, then I'm going to be yelling really loud that I don't want to be paying you $98,000 because that person isn't there. You know, and I think we will all understand that, and we'll be able to stipulate to that at some point or another. The other piece of concern that I had in the very beginning, and I see we finally got it cleaned up this morning, was in regard to on Appendix A on page 8, the services of the licensed health professional. It talks about evaluating all inmates who answered questions, yes to questions 7 or 8, or yes to 2 of any of the questions 1 through 6. My concern was the fact that not everyone that comes in the intake answers the questions appropriately, that come tomorrow morning when they're sober, we may see something significantly different than when they came in the door. So we added the clause in there, or any inmate referred for evaluation by corrections staff. I think, you know, we had to have something in there that if something showed up different that wasn't on the intake survey, that we had it covered, that those people would also be evaluated. Other than that, I was reasonably comfortable with the document. You know, is it perfect? Are there things we could probably tweak a little different? I'm sure there is, but it's certainly a very, very good first step.
I would agree. I have a few questions, though.
Okay.
Staying right on Appendix A, I would think there should be some statement under the description of these 2 positions of what the basic minimum qualifications are. So in other words, for $98,000, you should at least expect X, or for $65,000, you should at least expect Y. I mean, whether that's a master's degree, a BA, a certain number of years of experience, something. What are the basic expectations for these 2 positions? I mean, that's core to the hiring. I know you may have already hired some people, but the bottom line is there should be expectations. Anyway, I think there should.
Joni, as I read this, or Carl, whoever may answer, we did not get a job description for these 2 positions as part of this document. Somewhere along the way, I think we probably should see what those job descriptions are, what the minimum qualifications are. I'm sure Todd has it. They weren't part of this document. I think if we had those, you know, it would probably answer
Why
those
can't
questions.
you attach them as Appendix C?
Yeah, we can have those attached as part of the agreement, I believe.
I think we can.
Okay.
Anybody, is there anything else? You know, I think that was just the
just
thing.
getting started.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm a lawyer.
Move right on. Yeah, every time the attorneys touched this contract, it got worse, Phil, in case you were curious.
Well, some of this is maybe picky, but for example, under number 6, standard performance, it says in accordance with the legal standard applicable. Generally, with regard to the rendition of services by professionals, you're talking about the legal standard of care applicable. You don't really necessarily need that. I'm curious what the standard of care applicable to mental health professionals has to do with the union bargaining agreement. I don't know what that has to do with anything.
Oh, you're back on.
Page 2, paragraph 6. And it's, they're going to provide their services in accordance with the employee union bargaining agreement. They're not in the union. They're not our employees.
Their employees are in their union.
Well, they're in their union.
Yes.
They
Oh,
are-
their
we-
employee
we
union
have to-
bargaining agreement.
We have to remember, they are their employees, not ours.
Okay. That it was not at all clear when I read this. And what are they referred to as the NCLMHA? I would add that in front of employee union bargaining agreement, so it's clear whose union bargaining agreement they're working with. And the third question that arises out of that same paragraph is we, have a regular, apparently, a lot more than there used to be a couple of years ago, people in Leelanau County, what happens? I mean, addiction, drug or alcohol, and depression associated with it are so prevalent. And then you get into, bipolar and schizophrenia, but ignore those two for a moment. If the least you're shopping out to Leelanau County are folks with an addiction and a depression issue, what happens to them?
Just like under our current medicals.
Chris?
You raised a good point. That was one of my revisions after meeting with Captain Renee Schmidt.
Chris, I hate to do this, but they're not gonna hear you on the TV or on the website if we do it the other way. Is that mic open? We won't be able to hear your response without you speaking about mic.
While you're doing that, why don't you address a corollary issue from the next page, which is what do we do on weekends?
Yeah, the way it's written, they're not responsible for the weekends. So we don't have the weekends covered. We don't have Leelanau County covered or any other jails where we will ship inmates to. That was a concern that I brought in one of the revisions that we made early on. And Mr. Kovacs and CMH can address why they rejected that and didn't want that in the contract. But I thought it was important to address that. I know it was important to the sheriff to address that because, as you state, we do ship inmates to Leelanau County primarily, Missaukee County as well, Antrim County, I know. So what do we do? What do we do with those inmates? And as it is written, CMH is not going to provide services to those inmates. It is strictly those inmates housed in our jail, just right across from this building.
Even for extra money?
I mean, as it stands right now,
It's not part of the contract.
yeah.
So to go along with that, the medical services contract we have is the same way. The only inmates that are covered under our medical services contract are those under our roof. Everyone else we pay out of pocket for. And that's pretty standard with a medical contract. They don't want to have to put their personnel on the road and take them out of the facility and take away from time needed there to send to another county.
Leelanau has, medical care for the people in their jail. Do they have mental health care for the people in their jail?
Urgent and emergent, just like we do. So, but now, what we do on the medical side and what we will do on the mental health side is we really try to vet who we send out to make sure they're the healthier inmates. Part of this contract calls for regular meetings with the medical and mental health staff and correction staff. So just like when we board out inmates now, we get with the medical department and say, what are the medical needs for this inmate? What are we looking at if we put them out? What kind of services do they require? We're gonna have to do that same thing for mental health with the inmates we're looking to board out. If we have inmates that are requiring mental health services, we're gonna have to look at keeping those inmates in and select other inmates to board out.
Well, as a general rule, I don't think we are they allow us to board out prisoners with much of a physical or a mental issue or special needs prisoners. They simply will not take them.
For the most part, they want your
General.
healthiest, most well-behaved inmates.
The other thing I see on page 3, which also relates to Appendix B, is I think it's clear that if there is a disclosure of planned criminal behavior, that the mental health worker is obligated to affirmatively disclose that. If an inmate expresses an intent to harm himself, herself, or someone else in or out of the jail,
Yes.
this isn't going to be one of those, oh no, there's a privilege here, and I'm not going to disclose that.
You know,
It looks to me from Appendix B that they recognize an obligation to disclose
Correct.
that. Okay. I know you've made a good effort, a very good effort, with regard to the various rights and responsibilities of the parties, who pays their own attorney's fees, indemnification and the like. I know that the county is insured. I didn't see any reference in here to what, if any, insurance, CMH maintains, and is they're supposed to maintain it in any given amount.
MMR. They have the same MMR, maybe we do.
Same contract?
Very similar.
Again, those are questions I asked in an earlier draft. The initial draft,
That's why you hire a lawyer.
and they get me cheap, so.
Well, that's a fact.
So the early draft talked about mutual indemnity. That we're going to both indemnify the other in case we get sued by a third party. My experience with those clauses is that they can become a nightmare if faced with litigation. That one, it drives up the cost because we're going to have to file cross claims against each other, and really, not to sound politically incorrect, but it becomes like this Mexican standoff type situation. What I wanted to see, which they won't agree to, and I understand their position, is if they're providing a service, our standard vendor services agreement says the vendor who provides that service, they have the duty to indemnify us, name us as an additional insured, up to certain amounts as stated in their policy, which they'll provide proof of. So that was in my revision. As indicated, they were not going to agree to that. They've got good reasons for that. Ultimately, talking to their counsel, Hyder Chasm, we both said, look, you're not going to indemnify us. We're not going to indemnify you. We're both governmental agencies. We both have governmental immunity. We have qualified immunity in civil rights violation cases. We'll just be responsible for the actions of our own parties. I mean, we fall back to what common law says, really. And so once we agreed to that, there really wasn't a point then to get into insurance, additional insured, et cetera, because at the county we have, I think, 15 million. I'm not sure if it's per occurrence or aggregate, but we have the insurance, we have the coverage, and I understand they do as well. Talking to Hyder Chasm, so I don't really see that as really a problem.
I guess my only suggestion was that it just simply be referenced, that they have an obligation to maintain insurance and whatever.
I mean, we could.
5 million, 10 million, 15 million through MMRA or whoever they use.
Well, statutory.
You don't have to be
CMH is
named as an
required.
additional benefit. You don't have to have any say over the
Yeah.
right of counsel.
Something we could certainly look at. I'm not opposed to that.
Yeah, and I guess, getting back to the disclosure, I think that's in the Appendix B under paragraph 2.2 on page 10, where the business, unless disclosure is required by law, I believe a threat of harm to another, the planned commission of a crime, is something that's required to be disclosed.
Yes. Yeah, and they agreed that you know, that they will testify when they get a subpoena. So reading those two together, I agree with you.
Well, you know, directors have come and gone at CMH, but, you know, there were years where CMH's cooperation with probation and parole was less than enthusiastic. Just want to make sure that this relationship is not only healthy for the people who are receiving treatment, but that there's a good working relationship with other professionals who are attempting to get these folks rehabilitated and on their way. You know, not enabling their drinking by refusing to disclose that they're drinking again, or they're drugging again, or they beat up their girlfriend again, that sort of thing.
Well, our CMH connection with prisoners will cease at such time as that person is released from the county jail. You know, I would hope that they're not drinking and drugging inside the jail, otherwise we have other issues that we have to address.
It
But,
happens from time to time.
I understand, but I'm just saying that as a general rule, I think the big piece that this gives us, what this peer support person gives us, is the opportunity to have an individual who helps integrate those prisoners back into our community. And I think that's a piece that we've been missing for a long time.
Judge Power likes to think of it as a case manager, and I think to a large degree, whether it's not called that, that's really the role that he always wanted to see.
Okay. Any other board members have questions, Tom?
Well, I was looking at term, that's something I'm always looking for in any contract. So on page 2, there's a definition of term, number 1 on page 2. And then on page 14, there's another description of term, where on 4 at the top, 4.1 term. The language is a little bit different in 4.1 than it is in number 1 on page 2, as to when, you know, the length of the contract is. I just think that should be, you know, I mean,
Did you need the exercise?
There is a seat at the end with a mic.
No, that's all right. So when it comes to HIPAA, so the term is going to be governed by the federal regulation. So that's why there's a difference. So our term, when it comes to protecting health information, by law, by federal law, you know, that responsibility is in place up until we return or destroy protected health information. So that explains the difference. So in other words, if we try to make it so that the business association agreement, the term was identical, that would be void because it would conflict with federal law.
well, I see the HIPAA's mentioned in 3.1, but I just thought it would be, if somebody was to jump to page 14, they might get a different impression of what term is than if they just stuck to reading it sequentially and read page 2 first.
Yeah, and you know, we've marked the business associate agreement Appendix B, and it is identified, as you say, in the
Okay.
agreement.
I just
So-
was, my question was it in sync?
Well, I think
Yeah.
the only thing about the term that was questionable about, for me, is when we look on the front cover, if you will, it says the termination date of the initial term is September 30th of 19.
Yeah, we're gonna,
With an automatic renewal of October 1st.
That-
And then in section 1 of the agreement, it talks about shall be continued through December 31st of
yeah,
2019.
we're gonna have
We
to
need-
fix that,
We have to clean that up, I think.
because the first draft that CMH provided, there was
We were looking at an
automatic
October
renewal,
thing.
which I struck that out, and so.
Yeah, so that's the first page, cover page is just a typo, really.
That is a typo, that will fix, not a problem.
I guess if you wanted to add clarity, as Commissioner Mayer has suggested, under 4.1, you could add, but in no circumstances shall that term exceed the length of time described in paragraph 1 on page 2, something to that effect.
Sure.
Other questions up here? Carl or Joni, you want to add anything? Good?
thank our hardworking attorneys for their effort on this contract, and also to commend this ad hoc committee for the hard work that everyone has done. And particularly, I know that Captain Ritter and Joni have spent a lot of time going back and forth trying to make something that's workable, that's going to expand mental health services in the jail and going to improve conditions for the inmates. So I want to, thank all of you for your effort, and we appreciate it. Thank our staff, Joni and Lori, our finance director. So we're looking forward to collaborating and making this happen. So thank you.
If the Board of Commissioners passes this tomorrow night, Carl, which I'm hoping they will, what will be the effective date to start? We have the employees identified, I understand, correct?
We did interviews.
You want to come up?
Sure you do.
We did interviews jointly with the jail staff, so Captain Ritter and a couple of the corrections officers. We have identified the licensed mental health professional who is a current existing employee of ours, and we also identified a peer support specialist. We have not officially offered the positions because we cannot do that without a signed contract. I believe that December 1 would be a date that we could start, but recognize that as soon as we make the offer, they will have to give notice to for our internal employee to their supervisor, and for the external peer person to their current employer.
Okay. Sheriff, do you have anything you want to add?
Thank you.
I was sure you did.
Just as a reminder, on March 21st of this year, Captain Ritter and I appeared before the county board with some recommendations for operational enhancements at the jail. This was one of them. And at that time, we stated we're going to talk to our medical health provider and ask them what it would cost for additional mental health services. And that progressed into requesting bids from CMH, Correct Care Solutions. So this started back in March. And yes, I have some concerns about the continuation of care. And that is and I'm more concerned about the peer support specialist, because that person, it's my understanding, is the one that has the most influence on the inmate to ensure that they don't come back to jail, to make sure that they get the correct help during their stay, after their stay, so they don't come back in jail. And I'm concerned that if that person leaves for a period of time, I've been told it takes 6 to 8 weeks to make a replacement, that there isn't anything in place that says that someone will step in and pick up that workload. Now, I'm going to assume that if a employee at Community Mental Health is dealing with 8 or 10 or 12 clients, that if that person quits, somebody steps up or steps in. They have something in place to manage those people until they can be found a permanent replacement, so to speak. And I find it hard to believe that with 308 employees and a $70 million budget, that can't be accomplished on an interim basis for a couple of months. They've said that they're going to try to do that. I don't see anything in writing that points that way, but that's my concern. That, and especially with the peer support specialists, that what happens to those people? Maybe 5 or 10, I don't know how many people that peer, and I'm guessing it's going to be a fairly large number because of the mental health issues we have in the jail. that what's gonna happen to those people? Who's gonna continue making their appointments, tracking them, the caseworker, as you said, Judge? I guess we're putting a lot of faith in community health, mental health, that somehow will happen, but it's not spelled out in the contract. Those are my concerns.
I guess it's a question relating to that, Sheriff. I don't know, or maybe CMH can answer this. I know in the field of medicine, often they're called locums. There are nurses who you can hire who will show up and fill in vacant spots. There are physicians in varying specialties who, especially like emergency room physicians, who work for a service and they'll show up. What does CMH do when you lose someone? I mean, a vacation's one thing. I assume you plan around that, but there are family emergencies, deaths, people get sick. I mean, you must have something you do to fill in. You don't just let your clientele, as the sheriff says, drift, do you? I mean, what this says is you don't have to fill the position with existing staff members. I guess my suggestion is there are people who might not be your existing staff that you're in a better position to locate and bring them in to fill the spot.
So we have tried to look for bachelor's level staff, master's level staff in terms of locum tenens, so to speak. It's not successful. They don't exist for behavioral health, and especially not in this area. So that is not an option that we have available to us. In terms of the actual contract itself, as we've noted in the very beginning, we are limited with our funding sources. Our current funding sources require that we provide services in a particular way, which we do through CMH. It does not allow us to provide the service in the jail. That is why we're where we're at today, that the county and this ad hoc committee has said, we want to pay you then. So with the monies that you're paying us, we will hire the individuals, we will do staff development, we will keep them there, we'll do the best that we can so that you don't have turnover. But it will, that's the reality of a working world. And as we stated in the contract, we would provide for established service because we don't want them, floundering, as you noted. The agreement that we had the night that we spoke was that we would likely have to do that with our supervisory staff because we cannot pull from our current direct care staff. But we will make sure, as the contract says, that the established services are provided.
Nate, do you have any questions? Anyone else? Any other comments? Okay, I'll bring it back to the board. If no one has any additional questions, I would entertain a motion to recommend to the County Board of Commissioners that they enter into this agreement between Grand Traverse County and Northern Lakes Community Mental Health Authority as outlined.
I'll second that.
I guess I'd like to know what, if any, of the suggestions made this evening are going to be added.
Right, okay. All right. All right, so the things that we're going to add are specific to
Job description.
the
as
job
appendix
descriptions
C.
as an appendix C, and something in regard to.
Clarify which union.
Clarify the union
Clear.
contract.
So
Who's,
put,
whose union?
just putting that in front of, and then you also mentioned in the indemnity clause that they must maintain insurance.
They have an obligation to continue their insurance policy, some insurance kind of language.
Everybody's okay with that?
We were going to add to the term description on page 14.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That it can't be any longer than the term described in paragraph 1.
Okay. All right, so, again, I will entertain a motion as outlined with the amendments. Tom, did you make that motion?
Yeah, I'll make the motion.
Do I have support?
I would support it with the amendment as a recommendation to the county board.
Any further discussion? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Right.
Thank you very much. It's been a bit of a struggle, but I think we've truly identified a way to address the mental health issues in our jail.
Well, in a year from now, I mean, you're going to have an actual year of performance, so a lot of these hypothetical questions will have been answered in real life, real
Yeah.
time.
6 months from now, I suspect we're gonna see a significant difference. I truly believe it will.
Hope so.
Okay,
All right, sounds good.
Thank you. Motion to
Thank you, Chris.
recommend this RFP to the county board.
well, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the RFP, and Todd's probably better at outlining what's in the RFP than I am. As we originally talked, one of the things that this committee was charged with was to create an RFP to find a jail consultant. What we decided we kind of wanted to do, or at least Todd and I talked about, was a way to kind of slow it down just a little bit, although how much slower we can get doesn't really matter. But the fact is, the needs assessment that we have for our county jail is 5 years old. The evaluation of our current facility is older than that. So what this consultant, as I understand it, and maybe Todd will outline it differently, as I understand it, what this consultant will do is they will come in, they will evaluate our current facility, they will review our needs assessment, and they will identify, that yes, you need a new jail, or, possibly they'd say no, but I suspect that they will say that they need a new jail. And then we will go out, at the direction of the County Board of Commissioners, and we will solicit bids to design, build, however we choose to do it, for the construction of a new jail. This consultant will remain long enough to evaluate the design of the new jail to ensure that it in fact meets our needs assessment.
And help vet and validate the vendors
The-
and their
the
ability to
architects.
fulfill the
Right,
contract.
but then, at that point, this consultant will be done. The architect, contractor, whoever will finish the construction of the new jail. I think it gives us, it slows us down in that it gives us another set of eyes, but what it does, it validates our outdated, if you will, needs assessment and evaluation of our current jail. Tom?
Yeah, if it's all right with Captain Ritter, I would just like to say that I believe we're looking at two buildings, that we need to have a building adjacent to the government center, and it could take part of the office area of the old law enforcement center, but essentially a small building located approximately where the parking lot is on Washington Street. And to back up just a little bit, the other suggestion I would make for the consultant to look at is that we talk to the owners of the Park Place, I've already introduced myself, and reopen the brownfield plan to build a parking deck in their parking lot, which was a plan, so that parking deck could be used by the courts and replace some of the space lost in the Washington Street parking lot, and also provide parking for the Park Place Hotel at the conference center. And he said he was interested in that, the gentleman who runs that company. So I would like to reopen that, and that backs up the process just a little bit, because you might want to get the parking deck
Well,
on target before you build the small jail facility by the location where we're at right now. And then at the larger jail, the jail that most people commonly talk about out on Lafreniere, is the main facility, in other words. But I do think there should be holding cells. There should be some kind of jail facility adjacent to the government center and the courts.
I think where we have to be a little careful, Tom, in that we cannot enter into discussions about the parking deck or those kind of things. That's not the charge of this committee. I believe that when our new needs assessment is updated, one of the components of that needs assessment has to be the facilitating of prisoners for the courts.
Yes.
When the new district court building was built, there were areas in that facility that were specifically designed, or were supposedly designed to take care of that for us. My understanding is we're not utilizing those facilities, and the question is, are we not utilizing those facilities because of the fact that the jail is 100 feet away across the parking lot, or is it because there's a problem with those facilities? I think that's part of the needs assessment. Phil mentioned the fact that there used to be a room on the third floor of the historic courthouse that was supposedly there for holding prisoners at court time. Since then, that office, that has now become an office space, but, you know, I think part of the needs assessment has to be, if the jail is not here, part of the needs assessment has to be a way for us to house prisoners that are going to court. Do you agree with that, Todd, or?
Yeah, I think the needs assessment will identify, when you're looking at where we're going to build a jail, that's part of the needs assessment. And if they're looking at, we're gonna build a facility offsite, part of that needs assessment will be, will we need a footprint here? Personally, I think if you build offsite, you will need some kind of footprint here. But we should let the needs assessment drive that, and that's part of what we're asking this person to do.
Well, I agree with that. I just wanted to throw it out there because we usually just talk about one building, one facility.
Well, I think that's where the important upgrade of our needs assessment has to happen. Because if we truly are going to identify that we are going to go off-site and build a new jail, one of the key components of our need is that we have a way to house prisoners for the courts.
This proposal says that the project manager will be the construction manager.
And so this is not a final RFP, this is a draft. There was a template that I used out of NIC's website, so there's still some things that need to be cleaned up in here and revised.
I'm not necessarily
Yeah.
opposed to that, but
Yeah.
it just,
Well, I think at least when we talked about it, we talked about this, and we may find that I expect that the person that does this RFP comes from NIC or DOC.
I would imagine as well.
I'm guessing they're gonna come from the
I
National
think they're
Institute
the
of
ones that
Corrections.
are gonna have the expertise to really step into it.
And they're going to evaluate that. They may or may not bid the next phase of it. My guess is the person that does this will probably bid the next phase, but they may or may not be the selected vendor. You know?
I don't know if the Park Place needs a parking lot, they could do it the old-fashioned way. They might actually build it. They got a, $24 million building for $7.5 million. I think there's enough left over there. The old-fashioned way before we give away taxpayer money to let private developers build parking decks and do infrastructure. And they used to do it on their own dime. Oh, it's so easy to spend other people's money.
That's another discussion. I guess my question would be, is this committee opposed to our taking this request for proposal to the county board, knowing that at this point, there's still some tweaking that needs to be done with the final draft of the RFP? Nate, you're shaking your head no?
I think there needs to be clarity as to what your RFP is, because that document is almost exclusively project management and construction. It doesn't talk about the needs assessment at all.
It's a
Only the
construction
beginning.
manager.
It does in the beginning.
Yeah.
It just mentions it,
Yeah.
but it doesn't address the needs assessment, so it probably should be more expansive than
Well,
what that
and
says.
like I said, my intention was, with this RFP, was that number one, it evaluates the existing structure. Number two, it evaluates the current needs assessment, and then it moves forward with the,
And
preventing
unfortunately,
the other
Chris
issues.
just left, because Chris has volunteered to help go through this next week
Well-
and clean that up.
Yeah, I gave it to him tonight, but I think
Yeah.
it's important, we can do the document later, as
Right.
long as we have clear direction as to what this recommendation is gonna be. I think that the RFP is fine, we can draft it up later.
my initial thought was, this committee was charged with two things. Number one was to deal with the short-term mental health thing. I think we've done that. The second was to select a jail consultant to help us move forward with the jail. And I think this, although I'm not completely happy with the document, I think we need to deal with the document some more. I think going forward with the idea of hiring a consultant to evaluate our current facility and look at our needs assessment and help us identify our needs. And then that's the extent of what this committee will be charged to do. Once that needs assessment is finished and the current jail is taken care of, once the county board contracts with someone to design and construct the jail, we are done, then the actual construction of the jail comes under the purview of the CJCC.
Well, hiring the consultant is a county board obligation.
That's a county
I
thing.
guess what,
but-
I would make a motion that we recommend to the county board that they engage Mr. Forsythe to draft an RFP for purpose of retaining a consultant to perform a needs assessment, period. No project manager, no construction manager.
I would second that motion.
Just a needs assessment.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll support that too.
So we're going to hire a consultant to address the current facility and the needs assessment.
And Mr. Forsythe presumably will draft an appropriate agreement that the county board will approve, subject to their approval.
Okay. Any other discussion? I see some head wagging, so we must be okay with that. Any other further discussion?
I guess the concept of a regional jail is once again going to fly away like a dove in the spring.
I think so.
Heaven forbid.
Okay, if we have no,
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
okay, so we have a motion and a second. If there's no further discussion, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same? Is there any other business to come before this board tonight? Any other public comment? Stand adjourned at 6:16. Thank you very much.
Thank you.